Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Bacon and Coffee, another LinkedIn Live this morning. I have an incredible guest. We're going to have some fun, but we're going to start with our 30-second countdown. Here we go. All right, today, people, we're going to be talking about climbing mountains. It's like 10 degrees outside, and I don't feel like climbing a mountain in snow, but we're going to be talking about climbing mountains in your business. But before we get started, we're going to start with our bacon and coffee, or as I like to say, caffeine and bovine intro. Here we go. Good morning, everybody. And Tiffany Prince is with us today. Tiffany, how the heck are you?
I'm doing well. That intro is just jamming. I'm excited today to get going.
Thank you. Yeah, the bottom line, it's a Saturday morning. You got to kind of get everybody, kind of in the mood. So
Jazzed up.
yeah. So if anybody wants to jump on board on LinkedIn and put in some comments, we will see them. We'll try to answer your questions later. And so today we're going to be talking about leadership, but it's about climbing a mountain. How'd you come up with the title of the book? Why climbing the mountain? What's that all about?
It's a good question. Well, I like mountains.
Okay.
Part of that. But the analogy is really great because I found in my own leadership journey, you have to navigate around boulders up, down, and around, right? It's not like a straight shot. You also have to have the skills and knowledge. So you think about like training to actually climb like Mount Everest. There's a lot of things that go in there, but you don't do it by yourself either. You have a Sherpa. So these are things that I thought were great images because I think a lot of people think, oh, you go through a 3-day leadership training and then you're blessed and you know how to do leadership the rest of your life. I say leadership is a journey, not an event.
Right. Have you seen that commercial on TV? And it's a young Hispanic woman, I think is the best way to say it. And she has a jar, and it's the Everest jar, and she keeps putting money in the jar and putting money in the jar and putting money in the jar, and has kids and is on the treadmill and doing all this stuff. And finally, when she gets to Mount Everest, she's on a walker, right?
Yes. It's like, why haven't you done that sooner, right?
Right. Well,
like
because
fidelity or something, right?
Plan or save for it, and I think that's true with in business. We get in business because we have a great idea, right? And then we figure out, wait a minute, there's a lot of things to learn here. You got to learn about marketing, you got to learn about managing people, you've got to learn about clients, you've got to learn about technology, you've got to learn about Sherpas. I mean,
Sherpas. That gives you a competitive advantage, right?
Well, it does give you a competitive advantage. It's basically it's a crazy tour guide, right?
Yes.
I mean, that's what a Sherpa is.
That's right.
So would you consider yourself a Sherpa, a crazy tour guide towards leadership?
It's funny you should say that because one of my clients literally last month called me her leadership Sherpa. So that's kind of why I'm going to run with that just because of,
But don't run too fast. You're going up a mountain. I mean, you can't running down. That's different, but especially when a mountain lion or a boulder is chasing you. But that's completely different. Right. So what was the impetus? What got you into writing the book? It was like when I started writing my first book. It's not about you. It's about bacon. I wanted to tell people what social media was really about, right? And then I started writing a book that was about, social media. So I started talking about Facebook and LinkedIn and Twitter and Instagram and, all the things that were available back in 2013. Back then it was Snapchat and Blab, which are long gone. Well, Snapchat's still around. But TikTok is kind of eating that for lunch.
Yes.
But and then I got about 3 months into it and about 3 chapters into it, and the book was completely obsolete by the time I was done. Right.
Yeah.
So then I decided, oh, let's do something on relationship marketing. So then the real impetus for the book, which was life-changing for me, was really talking about how relationships work in business, especially in the B2B side. So what was the thing that kind of sparked you to give you that, that desire to do something and put it down on paper for all of
Yeah.
us to buy and see?
Yeah, and mine was a 3-year journey to write this
Hmm.
book. So, it's something that it takes time. A lot of people wanna do that. My impetus really was, experiencing leadership. I worked internationally. I worked for, cross-cultural, big corporations, and to be honest, I was left a little to be desired for the leadership that I saw, and I saw some good leadership, but I also saw mediocre and bad leadership. So
Hmm.
my passion is around there's got to be a better way to do this. So, 70% of new leaders are promoted without getting any kind of skill development whatsoever. So,
Hmm.
we got to attack that kind of deficit gap in capabilities because it is impacting our organizations. So, what I ended up doing is just diving deep into that, interviewing global leaders around the world from like HR, manufacturing. I even talked to the CEO of WD-40, Gary Ridge,
Oh,
who's an
wow.
amazing leader, by the way,
Hmm.
and just tried to, define what is leadership. And it's really hard.
Yeah.
What is leadership? Nobody has the same definition, but across the board, everybody said, you know it when you see it.
Right.
It's like, okay, well, what does that mean? So I, in this book, tried to distill what do I think good leadership looks like based on my experience and based on the research and the interviews that I had pulled together.
I think one of the first things we have to define with all of this is, when we think of a leadership, we think of a general in a battle. We think
Mm,
of, the president of the
right.
United States, or we think of,
Mhm,
the lead pastor of a church. It's
mhm,
the person that has, the mission, the vision, the values, the
mhm.
spunk, the personality, all the things. They have all of these combinations of
Yeah.
things, and but that doesn't necessarily make a leader, does it?
No, no,
Okay.
not necessarily. I mean, a leader is about, at the end of the day, it's about developing your people.
Mhm. Mhm.
So, how do you, and here's the thing I found too, where people are transitioning, they normally people get promoted into leadership positions because they're really technically or they're really good in their sales. The individual
Right.
contributors are high potentials. So they promote them, right? Either through because that's, the path that they want to go or they think they want to go. When they get there, they realize, oh, this is a different skill set. And maybe I'm not equipped to that. Maybe I don't like it. Maybe I haven't been given, that coaching and mentoring to
Mhm.
make myself successful. And that's where we see a lot of leaders kind of fall down because it's a complete shift in mindset from, being in control of what you do to be successful versus a whole team of folks, right?
Right.
And what are their motivations and how do you engage them and how do you deal with conflict within the team and how do you deal with those that may have wanted the position that you got promoted to,
Mhm.
right, on that team? That happens. And how do you navigate through that and make sure that make them an advocate?
Right. And you see that a lot in sales teams. It's like the
You
top
do.
performer is promoted to the sales manager, and the
Right.
one thing the sales manager lacks, they're really good at being, hunters. They can go
Mhm.
out, they're the guys, usually they're not so much the gatherers, the nurturers of clients.
Right.
They're
Right.
more the people that go out there and aggressively hunt down and find the people and can, know closing and know this. And what
Yeah.
management usually thinks is that, okay, since they're really good at that, they could teach everybody else how to be them. When
Right.
really the job is more about managing a bunch of adverse personalities with A players, B players, C players,
Yeah.
D players, hiring new people, managing and growing them, and all the and their major skill set is basically going out and killing prey, right? Going
It's
back to the mountain lion.
it's
So yeah,
completely different. What
yeah,
what I guess that book is, "What got you here won't get you there," right?
right,
You
right.
have to be able to have that mindset shift, and I think we do a disservice to our organizations when we
Mhm.
don't give them that space and opportunity to be able to make that shift.
So one of the first things about, first and foremost in the business, if you're going to, promote people who have good people skills and train them about people skills. That's number one. But the second
Yes.
piece is if you're thrown into that position because somebody has said, okay, we're going to make you a leader now, then I guess the first question is, what are they identifying? So in other words, let's start off with the core takeaways of your book. What are the three core things? If somebody reads your book, what do you want them to understand, or what do you want them to take away from
Mm.
this?
So, I mean, a lot of people at some point hopefully have leadership training, but I have found that improvising leadership styles. So, what is your leadership style? You have one or two primary that you like. So, visionary, reflective, inclusive, people leaders, uh, visionary,
Hmm.
the five that I have. But where I find really great leaders are those that can pivot their style based on their employees' needs, not necessarily their strength.
Hmm.
It's more about them. So that's one thing that I emphasize that's very different than what you've seen before. And also identifying those key critical skills that yourself and your team needs, because we're
Hmm.
in a profound transformation of work right now.
Huge.
And
Hmm.
there's going to be a lot of changes. A lot of what I had researched for the book too was around how artificial intelligence and globalization is going to impact the future of work. So
Hmm.
a lot of that kind of filtered into my thought process on that. And it's just the AI piece has just been expedited. So a lot
Hmm.
of what we do is going to be, let's say, offloaded to the technology. So we need to build more critical thinking skills, creativity, innovation, being more strategic with our clients and our partners.
Hmm.
Those are the skills that we need to invest in now, not only as a leader, but also on your team.
Hmm.
And then the other thing that I think is important to point out, and this is where I get a lot of aha moments when I'm doing training around this, is those derailing factors that and behaviors that leaders can do or have seen, and they go, "Oh, I should do that too," and how to overcome them.
Okay, so define what you mean by derailing. What is a derailing leadership
So,
behavior?
part of it is okay, one of them I talk about is perfectionism.
Hmm.
So, having perfectionism in yourself and I mean, in this world, you cannot have everything perfect all the time, right?
Right.
And so, if you're constantly kind of spinning around that and spending way too much time and not delivering what you're supposed to be doing on time, right?
Hmm.
You might want to take a look at that.
Hmm.
Um, the other thing is just being able to focus. That's a big one right now, right? There's
Right.
so many things that you can do,
Hmm.
but what should you be doing on? What should you be focusing on? Where should you and especially for your employees, what if you've got 5 priorities and nothing's a priority, right? So
Hmm.
how do you navigate those things when your organization might be saying, "We need to get this done, we need this, we need this," uh, helping them go, "Okay, what can we do today? Maybe next week? Do we need to add resources?" It's up to you as a leader to help them navigate through that because a lot of people are feeling overwhelmed on, how much tasks they have on their plate, especially when
Right.
people are leaving, right? In fact, I just was reading some research this past 2 weeks that the fact that there's so much attrition and how long it takes to backfill positions, those that are left behind are doing it used to be 2 jobs, but now it's probably like 3, 3.5, 4 jobs
Right.
while we're trying to, fill those positions. So, being cognizant of that and hopefully being able to kind of help your team out, in managing expectations and managing your leadership's expectations on what truly can be done, because if they get burnt out, they're gonna leave as well, right? So, it's like
Right.
a never-ending spiral. So, those are
Yeah.
2 examples.
No, those are good examples. And so before we dive into the issues, we all know that the pandemic was a huge change, huge disruption. I mean, I just interviewed somebody last week. He called it the transformational economy, and he
Mm,
said that the people, when I grew up, it was about my dad. You get a job, you get a gold watch, you get a retirement, right?
yeah.
And the motivation was you build the house, you live the American dream, that kind of stuff.
Mm,
And then my 30-year-old kids, they don't own anything, they don't care. They want to go to
right.
work at 5 o'clock in the morning, work till noon, go out and go hiking in the
Mhm.
mountains, and then
Yeah.
come back at 3, and then, work until 7 because they don't have any kids, and,
Right.
and they want to live a different lifestyle and have a purpose behind their life. So,
Yes.
the job is more about the purpose of their life
Yes.
versus the purpose of their life is their job, right? And I
Exactly.
think and I think the pandemic has really kind of exacerbated that, because now all of a sudden you've got families home with their kids
Mhm.
24/7, right? And now you're
Yep.
starting to see the dynamic of the family. You're starting to say, on a positive note, how do I make more of this? On a
Yeah.
negative note, I can't stand these people, I want to move on.
Depends on your
Right?
situation,
Yeah,
right?
exactly. Yeah. But I think that kind of adds an interesting layer to all of this,
Mm.
because you've got to learn to manage that disruption and change in the mindset and the shifts and all that other stuff. And that just,
Mhm.
I just think it complicates things. Do you agree?
It absolutely does. It
Hmm.
does. But I think it's interesting too, what you're talking about, living to work is a very US centric mentality.
Hmm.
So when I lived in Europe, I saw a bit of a different, they work to live.
Hmm.
So they understood boundaries and how to enjoy life. Yes, they had to work, but they also wanted to enjoy life while it was there. So I think it's interesting. A lot of, especially I've heard in the US, we're kind of shifting more to that European mentality of, hey, you know what? There's more to life than just working to, 14, 16-hour days, right?
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
we're starting to see that balance. I think what is interesting, and in working with global teams too, it used to be, I would work on 24-hour projects, right? So I would have things that I work on, I'd pass it off to the US, they would continue on, they would pass it on to our India team, right? So that cycle would continue.
Right.
I think that's kind of the mentality and the, kind of workspace that we're gonna find. The cool thing about this is you can find talent anywhere around the world. You're not limited to a regional, talent pool anymore.
Hmm.
You can
Hmm.
tap into people from anywhere around the world. Does it make it a little bit harder to manage? Yes, but there are definitely tools and techniques, and it's more about making that connection and understanding, being very clear in your objectives and results,
Hmm.
so you know where they are and helping them kinda navigate through that. That's what I found works successful, and, I think it's an interesting kind of space to be in and really exciting for me because I think it opens up the diversity and, thought process of what you can tap into and the possibilities.
Yeah, there's a huge new dynamic that's happening that I think is interesting and has to be dealt with, but and you have to be able to explore it and look at what's there.
Mhm,
So let's talk about the book from the standpoint is, normally when you write a book, you're usually writing it for somebody, and one of the things I found in
mhm,
marketing is there's two different ways to market. You could try to do, a mile high and an inch deep, or a mile wide and
mhm.
an inch high. And so I'm assuming that this book is targeted towards, that kind of very narrow niche audience that people have defined that, hey, I've got a problem here. I got something I really need to kind of discover. So what's kind of like the perfect avatar for the book? When you think of it, what's his
Mhm.
name? What's her name? And what are they feeling? What
Right.
they say, oh my God, I gotta get this book, right?
We'll call the avatar Pat, so it's agnostic.
I like that. Yes. And is it a
Alright.
he? Is it a she? It's Pat.
Yes, it is. And that leader, I would say it's targeted at somebody who was recently promoted and also, um, have never led a team before. It's
Hmm.
really about that foundational skill set on, here are things that I wish I knew when I started. I was definitely thrown into leadership positions and, like, basically, "Have fun storming the castle."
Yeah.
So I learned by, and I have some scars, proven on things that went well and things that didn't go well. So it's really to kind of expedite that leader
Hmm.
into, here are some things that you can do right now that could help you in your journey in that perspective. And like I said, leadership is a journey. So it's a skill set that you test and learn, and then you figure out what works. And the fun thing is that it's a dynamic thing. So when you have different team members come on and off, or you change teams, it starts all over again because there are different people. So
Hmm.
you're constantly having to kind of modify that, but understanding your core of what the, levers that you can pull will be critical for your success.
Gotcha.
Mm.
It makes me think, how hospitals basically sell information to baby food and formula companies so that they know immediately who's having a baby. Don't you wish you can get a list of everybody that's being promoted and say, yeah, here
Sure.
is your corporate diaper that you really need right now, and it's in the form of a book, right?
Yeah, there you go.
It's kind of a different way of thinking about it.
Right, right.
Which is what bacon and coffee is all about, thinking a little differently. So when somebody, basically when people want to read a book or when they want to learn something, they have a trigger that kind of gets them to say, you know what, I'm having a problem here, I'm having an
Mm,
issue. And I equate that, if we're talking about, let's use cars for an example. Um, you're driving your car and all of a sudden it's running real rough. You're thinking to yourself, well, maybe I've got less tire, air in the tire. Maybe, I got bad gas. It's usually
mhm.
something simple. I should be able to fix it, right? And so they don't take any action on it when really it's leaking oil, right? And the engine's about to burn.
Yeah.
So what is the trigger that would make somebody want to, or what's a perceived problem? What are they seeing that they think the problem is, and
Yeah.
of course, with new leaders, a lot of time it's like, it's not me, it's you, you're
Oh,
just
yeah.
not a good
Everybody
follower.
knows.
Right.
The corporate salute is what I like to
Yeah,
say.
that's a corporate salute. I love that. Yes. That's really good.
I've seen
Yeah.
that a lot.
I'm sure you have. Yeah. And then and speaking of cars, there's a different kind of one finger salute, but we're not going to go
Yeah.
there. But so,
Yeah.
so tell me about the corporate salute. How do they identify, that they have a problem and they really
Yeah.
need some help?
Well, there's a couple of ways. I mean, the
Mm-hmm.
number one is turnover, right?
Mm-hmm.
You have an issue, people are leaving. The number one reason why people leave organizations is because their manager, right? So, because
Mm-hmm.
they dictate the culture on what's happening. Um, and also from your organization, especially if you have a larger organization, they do employee engagement surveys every year.
Mm-hmm.
So from HR, they'll say, your engagement scores are low. So there's a sign right there,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
right? And also, if you're noticing that on your team, there's a lot of uh, conflict and distrust and
Mm-hmm.
and finger pointing, right? Here's your sign.
Right.
You need to do something about that because I think a lot of leaders are very scared at first, rightfully so, because you don't have the language, you don't have the words for it yet around performance management,
Mm-hmm.
candid conversations. That can be difficult. But I think that's where having foundational like coaching skills, you're asking questions, you're thinking about it from that perspective and helping that employee along that journey versus you saying, the feedback mentality, this is what you've done wrong, right?
Mm-hmm.
You hear the tone and that is different. Sometimes it's okay. If it's like a compliance issue or an ethical, you do have to say, no, 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 we don't do that, right?
You're right.
Like
Yeah,
a kid, right? You're like, that's the boundaries. But
that's
there's
right.
so many opportunities for you to be in a coaching kind of space and be curious,
Mm-hmm.
what's going on? How did you think that went? You know, and get their perspective on it. And what I have found when I kind of approach it that way, my employees have been actually harder on themselves
Mm-hmm.
than what I would have actually said. So I almost have to like overcorrect and go, well, what can we learn from this experience? What can we do differently? Um, do you want any help thinking through that process? Or how could you have worded that differently?
Mm-hmm.
Right. It's just helping them think in a different way. And you have to have that self-awareness also in order to be able to kind of navigate that conversation.
So, aside from the corporate, salute,
Yeah.
when people are, so there's that perceived problem. They think it's, everybody else. The real problem,
Mhm.
I'm wondering if it's a combination of, the employees not being trained properly or not given, the right amount of guidance or leadership or those kind of things, but
Yeah.
also the leadership above you hasn't
Yeah.
set the culture right. So,
Yeah.
what's the real problem that's happening that these leaders need to look at?
So, yes, right now, MIT actually came up with some research a couple weeks ago that said the actual right now, the number one reason people are leaving is not because of greater pay. let's face it, people are getting, bumps in pay.
Right.
It's actually around toxic work environment.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you see that people throwing each other under the bus, not an inclusive, or not promoting an inclusive and diverse, they talk the talk, but they're not actually
Mm-hmm.
walking the walk, right? That's a very different thing. So some of those things, and also leaders that are unethical, just bad behavior in general, So how do you fix that? Well, it starts with you, first of all, right? But
Mm-hmm.
that could take
Yes.
a lot of self-awareness, but it's also, if you look at your peer group, maybe you can emulate that behavior that you want to see in that organization. But purpose and power and passion are really kind of mixed in that. So being clear with your senior leaders and kind of having that conversation around what is the clear purpose, so I can communicate that down to my team, depending on how far you are, right? So they have a clear line of, why am I doing what I'm doing?
Mm-hmm.
That can help with the culture kind of perspective too. I tend to be more results driven. So
Mm-hmm.
I like to have that kind of red thread, like, okay, here's the strategy, it's stratosphere, like great, but let me distill this down into what can I do here and how does my team impact that result so that we feel happy, we feel productive, we, have a higher performance because we're helping each other and we're also meeting our goals.
So when you're talking to, let's say you've been engaged with a company and they want to bring you in, they have a leader that they want to kind of amp up a little bit. What's the most common thing that you see from them that is I would consider to be a resistance? What's the thing that they're
Yeah.
doing that's kind of, but you've got to kind of break through that barrier that gets them to understand that they have a problem, right? Because a lot of times it's not
Yeah.
me, right? It's like,
Right.
no, I've been doing it. I've been working for this
Right.
company for 20 years. I'm following the culture. I love what they do. They know me. Everybody loves me.
Mhm.
It's the people just don't like the new way of doing things or whatever it is, right?
Right.
What are you
Right.
dealing with, and how do you identify it, and how do you work with them?
Mm. I think the number one thing, and this has been going on for quite a while now, is just the basic understanding of change management and how to
Hmm.
deal with that, because the exponential level of change that's going on, even now, is really hard for people to manage and understand. And it used to be, 10, 15 years ago, we would have, maybe one or two strategic change initiatives that are going on at once.
Hmm.
Now there's 10 at a time. So I think organizations are having a hard time. And this comes down to the priority thing too, is
Yep.
how do I know what is important and in which direction we're going when we have all these disparate kind of change projects and I don't even know how they go together. It's somebody at the, executive level knows that like bigger landscape and picture of why, but I find communication is kind of the biggest thing, like understanding what can I do? How do I support this? I don't even understand why,
Hmm.
So I think if leaders understand and go, "Oh, okay, I have all these things that I'm having to deal with, and it's constantly changing, it's uncertain, it's volatile." Um, that's when I can say, "Okay, so if you're in that person's shoes, what what would you say to me being the leader?" So just
Hmm.
kind of like changing their mindset around that, and I find that actually gives some insight and some aha moments like, "Oh, I never really thought of it from that perspective." It's like
Hmm.
just putting yourself in somebody else's shoes tends to shift that mindset and go, "Oh, I see what I'm doing and why that communication didn't go very well because I was coming in attacking, right?
Hmm.
Versus I could have handled it and been a bit more, what's going on? What can I do? How are we, supporting each other to make this happen?"
So it sounds like to me one of the things you have to do is identify their EQ, which is their
Mm,
not their emotional quotient, but their empathy quotient. In other
yeah,
words, how much empathetic value they provide to the team above them, the team below them, and things of that nature, right?
absolutely, absolutely. And I also call it relationship intelligence too.
Hmm. Yep.
because it's about communication, it's about dealing with conflict, and it's understanding, where people's motives and intent are
Mm-hmm.
coming into that. So depending on what perspective they're coming in from for the organization and for themselves,
Mm-hmm.
that's kind of the way that you need to approach it to help them understand where you're struggling and coming from.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah.
So in the marketing side of things, I've seen this. I understand the concept very, very well, especially in the B2B side, because I've been doing it
Mm.
for a long time, right? I could tell you that, the average customer journey can take upwards of 2 years, 4 years, depending on the size of what it is that you're trying to do, because you're moving big pieces of a business around in order to do that.
Yeah.
And in the marketing world, it usually takes at least 3 months. I mean, the first month is discovery, the second month is strategy, the third month is implementation. And that's
Mhm.
just to get the change in there, right? Those are
Right.
the three components. And it can take longer. Even if you get the strategy in there, you're still tweaking it as you go along, because some things are working, some things aren't, depending on the audience and all that stuff. So when it comes to creating the solution for these companies, for these people,
Mhm.
how do you define the time frame and the solution, and
Mm.
what can people expect? Not
Yeah.
necessarily the steps that they've got to take, but what can they
Right.
expect as far as, hey, this is going to take me a while, or these are the things that I need to do.
Yeah. Part of it is just kind of getting past that mindset of like a 3-day leadership kind of boot camp, right?
Right.
That mentality, and it's been shown too from research that it's not effective to do it that way.
Right.
So what I like to do is come in and say, okay, do you have a program, leadership program? Because that's like, are we starting from nothing, or are we like building from whatever you have right now?
Mm-hmm.
And so understanding that, and then looking at their company values is really important. Like, and do you have any leadership attributes? So if they don't have those pieces, that's where I come in and do an analysis and recommendation of, okay, based on my experience and what's, the critical skills for especially new leaders coming on
Mm-hmm.
board.
Mm-hmm.
These are the skills that are really critical to start, like, coaching, like conflict management, like emotional intelligence, as we were talking about. Those things I found, if you have those and spaced out, preferably. So I've worked with multiple clients over the last couple of years, is breaking it out over 6 to 12 months
Mm-hmm.
and picking one skill a month. So coaching is going to be January. So you kick it off, you have that information, they could have self-directed learning. And then after that, either have a mentor or a group coaching session or peer coaching session where they're talking through, hey, how is that going? How have your coaching conversations gone? Or if they have one coming up, being able to talk about, okay, I really have a need to have a difficult conversation. How can I frame this? And having them bounce that off. I find, that what I talk about, the difference between the knowing and the doing gap.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people know about leadership, but they actually don't use it and do it to the extent that they're becoming that great leader.
Right.
That makes sense. So it's just really having that journey and understanding, okay, what are those critical skills for your business and what you need to accomplish in the next 2 to 3 years?
Mm-hmm.
And then how do we set our leadership up where they have those skill sets to help guide your folks to meet those strategic goals in the next 2 to 3 years?
Mm-hmm.
So I also find too is looking at your leadership pipeline too. Who do you have in the wings? Are you
Mm-hmm.
giving them any development? So that's an opportunity too. There's some things that they can start to build, leadership without authority, developing their personal brand. What does that look like? And having them sit on projects so that, when people move up or move out, you have people in the wings ready to go versus scrambling and figuring it out.
Yep. So one of the things in my world is what I call glamour metrics. And
Mhm.
what glamour metrics are is that somebody was either they went to a conference and somebody said, "Oh, you need to measure your analytics and the numbers and the hits on your website is everything, and that's going to tell you what you need to know about anything you need." Or they've gone to a conference or a webinar, and they're really jacked and excited about this thing. And they've got it in their heads that, hey, more traffic equals more business, when in reality, more traffic doesn't equal more business. More traffic equals more noise. It's more conversations lead to more business. So how do you convert traffic to conversations? And that's where a lot of people fail, is they're measuring the wrong thing. What do you find in your business that they're measuring, or what KPIs or what things are they so focused on that are really kind of stopping them from achieving what it is they need to do?
That's a good question.
I like good questions.
Got me thinking. I think engagement is good, but it's overused, right?
Right.
Because there's so many factors that go into engagement. And I know when I've taken engagement surveys, it's hard just to say, well, is it on my team or is it the organization in general? Like, my team is good, but the organization, I don't know. It seems toxic to me, right? So it's like,
Right.
how do you have a, a linear scale on something that's a bit more fluid, right? So I think engagement is one of those things. If you look at, I mean, I like turnover, because turnover actually is a sign of something's not right. Because I know a lot of teams that I've stuck with leaders because regardless of what's happening, I just liked working with them.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt like they had my best interest at heart. So I'm going to stick with them through thick and thin, because sometimes, you have difficult situations in organizations. But yeah, I think the engagement piece is probably one that is most overused, just
Mm-hmm.
because it's not granular enough.
And does customer, satisfaction surveys, are there other things that get thrown into the mix that sometimes, kind of,
Depends.
yeah.
Yeah, it depends on, like, if you're client facing versus external, the other thing too, uh, the net promoter value, right? Would you work with me again? Those kinds
Mm-hmm.
of things, right? Then may or may not. It depends, because that's just kind of like a mood, like, today I feel like.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, and that's the biggest problem with a lot of surveys, is they survey you on a bad day. You're got a flat tire, your coffee spilled on you, and all this other stuff is, how's your life going right now? It sucks.
Yeah, right.
Right?
Today,
And then
yeah.
tomorrow, it could be, hey, I won the lottery, life
Yeah.
is great. It's like, yeah,
I
it's
just
a
won this big client, it's amazing. Yeah.
right. You're getting a snapshot in time. You're not really getting a big, enough of a sample what's going on. Okay,
Yeah.
so now we've kind of defined, what the solution is, and what some of the key indicators that are hold people back. So let's get down to the nitty
Mhm.
gritty. What kind of step by step? So let me I'll give you an example how I work. When I work with a client, the first thing I do is, they usually ask me, what are we getting for our money? They're already spending money on marketing or something like that. So,
Mm.
we have to evaluate everything that they're doing, right? We have to
Yeah.
look at, what are they doing in email? What are they doing in social? What are they doing on their website? What are they doing in ad spends? You kind of look at all that stuff and you say,
Mhm.
okay, what's the, you know, how do we measure ROI from this? How do we measure ROI from this? How do we measure ROI from this? And what is the short term, long term, you know,
Mhm.
customer journey map? Are you bringing enough
Yeah.
awareness people? How does that look? So that's usually the first part. The second part then is to come up with a strategy and say, okay, based on what I'm seeing, let's cut this for the time being. It doesn't
Mm.
mean we're going to do it forever, but let's just pull it out so that that doesn't muck up the results, right? So we
Yeah.
could see these are the key things we're going to focus on and see what happens, and then start to measure and tweak and kind of optimize what's going on. Then finally you implement that, and then you start to add things, delete things based on what results you're seeing. So how does that work in a leadership building training,
Mhm.
mind changing, Vulcan mind meld way of trying to get people to change their lives?
Right. Yeah.
Because
But
that sounds a lot harder than marketing to me. That's all I'm saying.
it's it's a bit of voodoo magic.
I bet. So how do you do your voodoo?
How do I do my voodoo? Well, I have an extensive background in adult learning theory, instructional design, so I understand how to design programs that
Hmm.
can help people learn. So
Hmm.
there's that differentiation, I would say. Um, and again, it does go back to, I really strongly recommend doing that initial needs assessment.
Hmm.
So understanding where your organization is, What are your strategic goals? How does that align to your values? So I do a lot of kind of information gathering. I'll also do, 5 to 10 informational interviews around, what are some of the gaps that these leaders are noticing? What did they wish they had? What was in place for them that they felt was beneficial for them stepping into the role? Are there things that people are doing that we should incorporate into this particular program? So I find that's a really valuable activity because it can set up these leadership programs much more for success than let's just throw some things, some skills at the people and just, I call that the spaghetti on the wall mentality. Yeah,
Right.
sure, I can do coaching and high potential team development and the conflict management piece, but it's not if it's not tied to why do I need to do this, or is this important, or are my leaders going to be holding me accountable for enhancing these skills, then it kind of falls flat, right?
So that and kind of a question in this realm is when you're engaged by a company, are
Mhm.
you generally focusing on one leader and working with them? Are you focusing across a vertical? So,
Mhm.
again, marketing is my space. You
Yeah.
have the writers and the designers and the programmers. I mean, those are
Mhm.
three completely different creative skill
Mhm.
sets, and each
Yeah.
one of their leaders can have different things. But if they don't work in concert, then there's an issue going on.
Yeah.
It's like there's got to be flow, there's got to be purpose,
Yeah.
there's got to be an equal purpose. Designer will say, well, that's not how it's done, and a writer says, well, this is the way that I think, and this is the way everybody else should think. And then, the programmers go, leave me alone and get me a coffee.
Yeah. Well, I would say it's a yes and depends.
Yeah. Sounds very improvisational to me.
It's
Yes, and
yeah, that and a consultant speak. But
right.
so here's the thing. First thing is leadership skills are agnostic. It doesn't matter
hmm
what industry, brand, department you work in. We're all people, and it's
hmm
about that. So
right.
that's number one.
hmm
What I found successful and kind of what I come into those synergies, like you were talking about, I tend to come in and help build programs for a certain function. So commercial team,
hmm
marketing team, medical affairs teams, right? Where there are synergies and where we can kind of put these folks together, which it actually works really well because then they get cross pollination and understanding where they're coming from is, those that are kind of adjacent to your function.
hmm
So sales and marketing,
Perfect. Yep.
easy, right? If you have research and development teams, those are great folks to put together because the higher up you get into organizations, the more likely you're going to have cross-functional partners,
hmm
building your network, right? So part of when I'm looking at building these programs is not just skill development, it's actually building networks. Um, have a phone a friend. Hey, you know what? I really liked you. Can I bounce this off of you? In confidence, I have this conversation.
hmm
Can I help you, help me with this? And that's the feedback that I've gotten from leaders that have gone through the types of programs that I build is like, it was great because I had resources of people that I could talk through because I understood, some of the skills I had been exposed to, understand it, but it's really the application of that and what does that look like,
hmm
that really was helpful and really helped me be a better leader because now I have honestly changed my behavior.
Would you say that's the kind of things that you do? Is it more of a mentoring kind of thing, or is it more of a mastermind kind of thing where you're
Mm.
using the body politic?
It's probably more like a mastermind
hmm
kind of thing
hmm
because, you give a little nugget and you say, okay, here's something you can work on. And we
hmm
don't want to go too expansive because again, like that's too much information dumped. You're only going to remember about 20% of that if you're lucky.
Right.
So keep it small, keep it micro learning, and then have them dive deep into that and
hmm
expose and talk about it and practice and learn from that. And hopefully by the end of that time period, a month, a quarter, they are feeling a lot more savvy and also confident in that skill, and then you
hmm
build upon that.
Gotcha.
Hmm.
All right. So as you've got these processes set up and the people are doing things, what do you show as a measurement, or what's the outcome that the customers see, or how do you present it so they realize that what's going on is becoming successful? How do you measure success? How do they manage success?
Yeah.
And then how do those two things come together so that everybody's happy, happy, joy, joy?
So, if you're thinking about high potentials, so that is the percentage of those that get promoted into leadership positions eventually within the next year or two. So that's one measure. If you're already in the role, then I would say, again, going back to the turnover thing, that's a key indicator. If people are leaving your team, probably not a good leader, unfortunately. So having that go down, because employee turnover has a very real value. I think right now, to replace an employee, now it depends on like the salary level and the skill set, but on average at about $40,000 per employee when they're leaving that takes to replace them. So that starts to add up. And we're talking about right now where there's huge attrition, that money value goes up and up and up, right?
Right.
So
Yeah, 10 people is $400,000,
yeah.
and 100 people is 4 million.
And we want leadership. We want talent retention. That's the key indicator right now, retention. How do we keep the
Right.
people? So that across the board from HR to executives, that is the metric they're looking at right now.
And that's a really big challenge because, I mean, I've heard that the average employee now is staying. I mean, again, there's very limited loyalty, comparatively speaking, to the way it used to be. I mean, when I worked
Yeah.
at AT&T, you were an AT&T-er for life unless you couldn't play in the corporate sandbox.
Right. Right.
Which I was given my pail and told to go home from there, and from Arthur Anderson. They said, no, you can't play in our sandbox anymore, which is fine. It's like,
It's not for everybody.
yeah, it wasn't for me.
Yeah.
But I think one of the biggest, there are two big challenges, I think. So if you're measuring the outcomes based on, retention, I think there's two key things that I think of right off the bat. Number one is millennials don't have as much loyalty. If they find a job that they want to move to Denver, they're just going to pick up and move to Denver, right? It's like, I want to be in the mountains right now. Okay, I'm done with this. I want to go to Phoenix and golf. Oh no, wait, I'm going to go over to Wilmington and swim on the beach, right?
Yes.
I mean, that's just their mindset. They don't have that loyalty.
Yeah.
And it's not a diss on them. It's just the way that they work. So obviously, and I think one of the things I've heard on the opposite side of that is companies are more and more resistant to train, to educate, to coach, to do things because they feel like they're investing in somebody else's, future. And in the person's future in the next company they work for future. The second piece of this I think is very interesting is globalization, right?
Right.
There are culture differences. One of the things I've learned in my business working in the B2B space is I have to work with people in the United States who understand the B2B way of doing things, right? If I try going overseas, their mindset is we're going to please you. We're going to tell you we could do it, but we can't. But they will do everything they can to let you know that they want to.
Right.
And they'll try to convince you that they can. But the thing is they don't think, act, and live the day-to-day lifestyle that a lot of the people here understand and know how to write. I mean, healthcare is different, culture is different. Our pluses and minuses in life are different, right? So I think those two things, that the nomad scope of the way that people treat their jobs today, and I think globalization, are two big issues. What do you think? What's on your thought?
Well, I would expand it out, not just millennials. So right now, all the research is pointing to everyone across the board. So baby boomers are actually, they're retiring. They're like, that's it. I'm gonna, because the stock market has done well.
Yeah.
So they're cashing out. They're like, you know what? I don't want to deal with this anymore. So you're seeing a lot of the attrition is actually retirement from that age group. And then across the board, like we talked about at the beginning of this conversation, people are reevaluating their life, what's important for them, their work-life balance, and what they want to do. So I think also what we're seeing is a shift in more what we call the gig economy, right?
Right.
I get to choose what I want to do because then I have more flexibility. And that's really big and key for organizations right now. And people don't want to be tied down to an office. So I think I just saw research last week that said only 13% of those surveyed that have remote work options want to be, in the office 100%. So that paradigm has shifted. So I think it's just having that flexibility of working with people, not having traditional hours of work. So I think we brought that up ahead, like 9 to 5 work. Why do you have to, if you don't have to be with somebody or collaborate with your clients or your team, you can do work from anywhere, anytime, right? So that's the flexibility. So like if you're a computer scientist, you've got it made right now. You can do your work from anywhere. You can do it overnight if you want. So I think it does make it more complex for understanding how work gets done. And I think as a leader, that's where it is key from going from what I call the butts and seats management.
Yep.
Here are my ducks. I see everybody. But were they productive? Were they having high performance? Maybe, maybe not. But it's more important to see like, okay, I see them. So they must be here doing stuff, right? That fear mentality versus what I call is, outcome based.
Right.
So work can be asynchronous if you need focused work or you're working on a project, you're working on a presentation, coding, whatever. You can have blocks of time. You can do that whenever. But if you have a team, you want to bring them together, then you have synchronous work. Maybe you need to do ideation and brainstorming. You need to bring them in, maybe even having them just come together as people and make that connection. So I think it's going to be an interesting balance on that. From the globalization perspective, I have a lot of experience in that. And finding the right partners, there are tons of amazing people in the world that can help you get stuff done. I think it's more about how you approach it as a leader and being very clear, understanding their cultural kind of mindset and constraint, but also being like really clear on, okay, this week, let's focus on this. Is there anything that we need to remove? Do you see anything that might get in the way? And yes, there are cultures that will always say, yes, 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 we can get that done. And then they don't.
Right.
You just have to know how to navigate that. And a lot of it is either the way they say it or there's a nonverbal sometimes gives that say that.
Yeah.
They can't. So it's you being savvy as a leader in navigating that. It's a skill set that it takes to get that right.
Right. And I think there's 2 other culture shifts that immediately popped into my head as you were speaking. One is I know a lot of baby boomers who are selling their houses. Because they built a house, and I'm a prime example of this. We have 3,700 square feet, right? We got a huge house. We had 2 kids, we had multiple dogs, we had multiple cats, and now it's me and my wife and a dog. And it's like we're sitting here looking at this going, we use 4 rooms. At 12, we literally do. It's a bedroom, it's the kitchen, it's the family room, and well, a couple of bathrooms. We're not going to go there though. But that's one thing. So what they're doing is they're selling their houses. And rather than, the traditional way of sell your house, buy a house, they're selling their house and they're getting an RV and they're traveling. Right. And then they're figuring out where they want to land, and then they land and they stay there for a while, and they maybe fix up a house and they sell it and they move somewhere else. I've got one friend who did that, who moved to Arizona, built a place, sold it, got in an RV, drove to Mississippi, found a place, rehabbed it, about to sell that, and now going somewhere else. Right. So, but still she works, right? She works in between all that stuff. The second thing, which I think is the biggest shift that everybody I think has to get used to, is what I call the cubicle economy. And that was, if you had a sea of cubicles, you could actually stand up and count heads, right? And if somebody needed to talk to you, they could walk out of the cubicle and knock on your door and say, hey, boss, I've got an issue. Now, with remote work, it's a lot different because the culture is very different. In other words, they can't just call you. They can't knock on your door. They need to schedule time on your calendar because you may be doing something completely different where they can't interrupt you. They can't get a hold of you in a Zoom meeting. They can't pick up the phone and call you. They could try texting you, but you may not answer because you're in the middle of another meeting, right?
Right, right. It's interesting you bring that up. So I actually had that. I have managed that. I had offices
Mhm,
in Frankfurt and Stockholm and London. And so when I was traveling with my team, we had kind of a level of escalation. So if you
mhm,
need to get a hold of me and it's critical, text me. And I said, I may not be able to pick it up right away, but I know that when I have a break or I have lunch, I need to get back to you right away because that's
mhm,
something you need something resolved quickly. Other than that, leave me an email or, leave me a voicemail, and then I
mhm,
will get back to you, that's I know it's less urgent. So it's again, as a leader, just being clear in what that communication, place is and
mhm.
how I will respond to you because I can't always drop everything and, jump on your issue.
Yep.
Yeah.
So
Same thing with,
so
like, instant message, right? Like an
yes,
instant message, I may not reply back right away, which could be
right,
difficult, but I think if you articulate that and say, "Here's the rules of operation," it helps because then people don't panic
right.
as well.
And that's very true. And it's a matter of setting up those rules and understanding the boundaries and what means what.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's really important. So the
Mhm.
last piece of this I want to cover is I usually like to finish out with a happy, happy, joy, joy, which is
Yeah.
what is your favorite success story? And we're about 5 minutes out, so we're getting close to the end here. It's amazing how
Mhm.
fast this goes.
Yeah.
But what's your favorite success story where you walked into chaos
Mm.
and turned it into, basically you polished that little piece of rock and it turned into a diamond.
Oh, man, I love it.
Thank you.
Happy, happy.
Happy, happy. Yes. It's all about being happy, happy.
Oh, so, yeah, okay, one thing is coming to mind, and I love this. This is one of my favorite programs I put together,
Hmm.
for a large, biotech company, and they were about on the precipice of launching 3 new products next year,
Hmm.
which means they had to expand their sales team,
Hmm.
and they did not have enough people to fill those positions in the wings ready to go.
Hmm.
So there was a bit of a panic on how do we get leaders ready in 4 months, by the way,
Mm.
into this pipeline.
Mhm.
So me and my client sat in a room for a day or 2.
Mhm.
We mapped out, okay, what are those critical skills that they need to do this and how can we do this? Like basically building the plane as we're flying here.
Yes.
It's like,
Uh-huh.
what can we do in this small chunk today? And we know we have like a month or 2 to build this out. So we we just kind of mapped it out, and this is kind of like the fruit of what I had started, like the micro learning chunks, little
Mhm.
bit over time. So
Mhm.
we brought them in person. We basically did a boot camp with them
Mhm.
and said, okay, uh, we had like an email exercise where they can't stepped into a role. They have all these emails they have to review, and then they have to prioritize which ones are they going to respond to first, second, third. They're in, performance issues with some employees in there that they have to deal with. So it's really kind of getting their mindset around how do I deal with this, getting
Mhm.
them ready.
Mhm.
And then there was a couple of other exercises, like they had to do a presentation based on sales data they were given. How do you present back to your team? What are the important things?
Mhm.
Little things like that. So that was a boot camp. And it really opened their eyes to say, oh, I thought I knew how to deal with this, or I thought I knew what I was stepping into for leadership, but it's very different than what I thought, or I have a lot of learning I need to do before I do this. So it's very
Mhm.
aha for them. So some of them opted out because they're like, maybe leadership is not what I want to do, which is fine, right?
Right.
But most of them were like, ooh, I have a lot I need to do. So we had mentors with them
Mhm.
throughout the process. They also were able to work with their leaders. And over 4 months, we did a massive, like, just boot camp and kind of upskill, and did, async so we did some webinars and different things. We had,
Mhm. Mhm.
lunch and learns. They can call in if they had different things that were coming up that they wanted to bounce off. But the other thing, that was the cohort I was talking about. They had peer groups, and they were really tapping into each other.
Mhm.
And I'm happy to say that 60% of them actually got promoted into leadership positions in the next year.
That's huge.
That
That's
actually
huge.
won a presidential award at that organization. It was so impactful.
Wow.
It was
That's
pretty cool. It
awesome.
was fun. I
That's
loved it.
awesome. Great answer. All right. So we are coming into the home stretch. We got about 2 minutes. So what I
Yeah,
want to do is give people an opportunity to get you to know you, how to get a hold of you,
yeah.
any of that kind of fun stuff. They find you on LinkedIn. What do they do? How do they, how do they get a piece of Tiffany? How's that?
Yeah, so you can get a hold of me. Check out my website, topofthemountainleadership.com is the main way. I have all my contact details there. If you're interested in my book, I'm on Amazon, Barnes and Nobles, any place you can imagine. Just type in Top of the Mountain Leadership, and I should come up. I've got a world and on top of mountain. So and if you have anything that you want to kind of bounce off of me, you're having leadership challenges, I'd love to have a chat with you because we are going through a very profound change in how organizations are going to operate. And I feel like I have lots of insights into how to be successful.
Awesome. Well, Tiffany, this has been a blast. Thank you so much for
Thank
coming
you.
on and dropping some sizzling hot bacon knowledge bombs on my peeps. I mean, that's the whole point.
Yeah,
And I
thank you.
appreciate you, and I look forward to talking to you again soon. So thanks so much.
Sounds great. Thanks for having me. Have a
Uh,
great day, everybody.
You too. And we're going to kick everybody off with our bacon and coffee close. Talk to you later. Take care.